They called her soft. Among the Death Worlders, where brutality was a badge of honor, she was known as the exception, a human general who preferred diplomacy over conquest, negotiation over obliteration. In the war councils of the galaxy, where strength spoke louder than wisdom, her name was often followed by laughter. To the warlords, to the brutal emperors of iron-fisted empires, she was a curiosity, not a threat. The human fleets were feared, but she was not. They believed she had been spared the true forge of Death World upbringing, that she had abandoned the raw savagery that made humans so feared. To them, she was weak. To them, she was soft. They studied her record, poring over every campaign she led. They found her victories unsettling. Where others razed cities, she took them intact. Where others demanded unconditional surrender, she offered terms. Where others delighted in breaking their enemies, she left them standing, their pride untouched. This, to the hardened warriors of the galaxy, was a defect, a flaw. They mistook mercy for fragility, and they whispered among themselves, plotting, watching, waiting for the moment to prove that she did not deserve her command. They pushed her, subtle provocations first. An illegal blockade here, a harassed trade route there. Her response was always measured, always careful. She sent envoys, delivered warnings, arranged talks. She treated the galaxy as if it were reasonable, as if it could be negotiated with, as if power could be balanced by restraint. Each time, they retreated with a grin, emboldened by her patience, misinterpreting her control as timidity. They did not understand. They only knew strength in the form of destruction. They did not understand the weight of the restraint she carried. Summoned to the Emperor's assembly, she stood alone among the other generals. They spoke over her. They ridiculed her openly. The ancient emperor presiding over the council made no move to silence them. Her reputation had already been set. They dismissed her victories as accidents, her survival as luck. They mocked her strategies, her compromises, her refusal to crush her enemies utterly. And in that court, drenched in arrogance and false power, they believed she would bend to their collective disdain. The emperor himself, centuries old and bloated with self-importance, addressed her with the same condescension. He praised the strength of humans, but pitied that she had turned from their legacy. He urged her to consider the value of dominance, the purity of conquest, the rightness of absolute power. She listened. She said little. Her silence was taken as acquiescence. They believed she would continue to tolerate their insults. The provocations escalated. They tested her borders, attacked supply lines, sabotaged trade stations. She responded as before, with containment, with warnings, with negotiations. Some of her human allies began to question her resolve. Younger commanders grew restless, demanding retaliation, calling for strikes to reassert human strength. She held them back. Not yet. There was still a path to prevent what would follow. She believed that the galaxy could still be reasoned with. The warlords mistook her refusal to retaliate as proof of cowardice. They gathered in secret, emboldened by the lack of consequences. They struck at the outer colonies, using proxy forces to mask their involvement. Again, she offered diplomatic solutions, sent envoys, demanded reparations. Again, they sneered and turned away. They believed they had found humanity's limit. They believed they had found the one human who could be bent. But the final blow was deliberate. A massacre executed in cold calculation. A human civilian convoy, composed of families, traders, and children, was intercepted in neutral space. The attacking fleet, led by a coalition of alien warlords, annihilated them. No survivors. No warning. No ambiguity. It was not a miscommunication. It was not an accident. It was a message. They wanted her to know that her words held no weight. They wanted her to feel the humiliation of powerlessness. When the news reached her, she did not rage. She did not scream. She did not curse the galaxy for its cruelty. She sat in silence, reading the transmission logs, the final desperate signals from the convoy. She closed the file. She issued no immediate orders. Her staff, waiting for commands, found only silence. For the first time, they felt a weight settle over them, something colder than anger. The next day, she decommissioned her diplomatic vessels. The envoys were recalled. Negotiation channels were severed. Her fleet shifted, redeployed, repositioned with clinical precision. No speeches were made. No declarations were issued. Her face disappeared from the galactic stage. In the war councils, her absence was mocked. They believed she had retreated in shame, that her soft heart could not bear the consequences of her weakness. She did not speak to the assembly. She did not attend their summons. The emperor's aides could not reach her. Messages went unanswered. Weeks passed, then months. Skirmishes continued elsewhere. The galaxy thought she had resigned herself to irrelevance. But her fleets had not stood idle. They moved without fanfare, without ceremony, cutting through sectors and patterns no one recognized at first. The strikes were not grand battles. They were surgical, invisible until the damage was done. Communications arrays vanished. Supply depots imploded from within. Planetary defenses went offline, without a shot fired. The warlords scrambled to find the source, to understand the pattern. They could not. Her strategies had always been sophisticated, but now they were something else entirely. Unfathomable, relentless, calculated to dismantle entire power structures without engaging in traditional warfare. Her former reputation as a careful negotiator masked the precision of her fury. She did not burn cities. She isolated them, stripped them of resources, severed them from supply lines until they collapsed under their own weight. The warlords begged for negotiation, but their transmissions found nothing. She did not respond. Her human commanders, the ones who had once doubted her patience, now followed her in silence. They understood now what the rest of the galaxy had not, that the mercy she had offered all these years had been a gift. It had been a deliberate act of restraint. It had been a warning. The galaxy's mistake had been interpreting it as a weakness. The alien factions, desperate to understand, turned to the Emperor for guidance. He, too, began to panic as the stability of his empire faltered. Her fleets moved toward core systems, bypassing traditional strongholds, dismantling the logistical arteries that fed entire armies. The Emperor dispatched envoys to plead with her, but they vanished en route. Messages offering apologies, concessions, reparations, all were met with silence. Rumors spread that she was no longer willing to accept surrender. Stories circulated of entire battalions disarming themselves upon seeing her insignia, preferring to surrender preemptively rather than face her strategies. Entire planetary governors fled their posts, terrified of her approach. Her reputation, once a subject of ridicule, became a shadow that darkened entire sectors. The galaxy scrambled to respond, but their coordination fractured under the weight of fear. The warlords who had mocked her tried to rally their forces, but their supply lines were already severed, their communication networks dismantled, their confidence eroded. Her silence became a weapon sharper than any blade. Every moment she refused to speak twisted deeper into the minds of her enemies. Panic set in across entire sectors. Some factions abandoned their posts and fled without engaging. Others attempted to negotiate with her sub-commanders, desperate to stop the momentum. But her forces relayed only a single order: no terms. Her strikes were methodical. She bypassed fortified strongholds and targeted critical infrastructure. Planetary defense grids failed in synchronized patterns. Entire fleets found themselves stranded without fuel or navigation as her sabotage unfolded. She struck in ways no one had prepared for. not with overwhelming firepower, but with precision that rendered resistance irrelevant. Fleets dissolved under logistical collapse. Armies surrendered out of sheer hopelessness. Her strategies exploited the complacency of generations, their reliance on predictable tactics, their arrogance in assuming they understood human limits. They had prepared for brute force, but she had mastered something else entirely. They had believed she was soft. They had not considered she could wage war without emotion, without hesitation, without a word. The psychological warfare escalated. She manipulated communication channels to sow doubt among the remaining alliances. Enemy fleets received false orders, leading them into ambushes they could not escape. Entire planetary governors turned on each other, unsure whether their counterparts were compromised. Panic overrode strategy. Her presence destabilized hierarchies without firing a shot. Alien soldiers began to abandon their posts before her fleets even arrived, terrified by the stories spreading faster than her ships could travel. Rumors claimed she had developed technologies that made resistance impossible, that she could see through every deception, that surrender was the only chance for survival. She made no effort to dispel the rumors. She let them grow, let them drown the remaining resistance. When alien factions attempted to consolidate their forces for a last stand, she shattered their fleets with coordinated multi-front strikes that should have been impossible to execute with such precision. She seemed to know their movements before they made them. The warlords realized too late that she had been mapping their weaknesses for years, during every diplomatic negotiation they had scorned, during every skirmish they thought she had tolerated. Her mercy had not been naivety. It had been data collection, strategy, refinement, preparation. She had given them every opportunity to back down, and they had mistaken her patience for inability. Her former critics now fled from the very shadow they had laughed at. Those who had once called her soft now begged to be spared. Some attempted to surrender territories, offering wealth, planets, and fleets in exchange for survival. She did not acknowledge them. Her forces accepted no surrenders from those responsible for the convoy massacre. Entire planetary governments self-destructed in desperation rather than face her arrival. Others transmitted desperate pleas directly to her flagship. Their messages met only with static. She dismantled them without pause, without hesitation. Her human commanders followed her orders with unwavering efficiency, but they began to question the scale. Some wondered whether the cost was now too high, whether the retribution had gone beyond justice. Yet none dared voice their doubts. They knew what would have happened had she not acted. What message the galaxy would have embraced if she had let the massacre pass without consequence. They understood that her silence was not rage but obligation. She had not abandoned her principles. She had fulfilled them. She had proven that human mercy was not a sign of weakness, but a choice, one that could be rescinded when abused. Her fleets reached deeper into the Imperial territories, encountering less resistance with each passing system. Planets surrendered without demands. Entire populations disarmed themselves at the first sign of her approach. Some imperial governors abandoned their posts, leaving their citizens to face her forces alone. Others attempted to mount offenses, but found their weapons inoperative, their ships sabotaged, their allies evaporated. Her campaign was not a war. It was a collapse, a systematic disassembly of imperial power. No grand battles, no heroics, just cold precision, inevitable and absolute. The emperor sat alone in his grand chamber, surrounded by the silence of a collapsing empire. His advisors had fled, his generals had surrendered, and his fleets no longer responded to his orders. The territories that once formed the backbone of his power had submitted without resistance. His name, once spoken with reverence, now echoed with irrelevance. The woman general had not responded to his offers, his pleas, his concessions. She had moved forward with the same silence that had shattered his alliances, dismantled his armies, and suffocated his power. The final message from his outermost defense stations confirmed what he feared. Her fleets had passed through the last barrier. There were no more obstacles between her and the Imperial core. The Emperor's transmissions flooded her channels, offering unconditional surrender, offering to dissolve his reign, offering to yield the symbols of his office. There was no answer. His remaining staff abandoned their posts. His palace guards dropped their weapons and vanished into the streets. The streets themselves emptied as the population braced for her arrival. Entire cities surrendered preemptively. They did not ask for terms. They did not request negotiations. They simply accepted that resistance was no longer a part of their reality. The warlords who had once mocked her gathered in secret. Now desperate to preserve their own lives. They discussed ways to defect, to disavow the Emperor, to align themselves with the power that now defined the galaxy's future. No one questioned the source of that power anymore. No one doubted its permanence. They did not understand how she had done it. They only understood that she had. The Emperor's final act of desperation was to convene what remained of the Imperial Assembly. He stood before them, a figure stripped of his influence, reduced to a voice with no followers. He announced that he would meet the woman general personally, that he would offer her everything. His audience, diminished and silent, offered no counsel, no challenge. They watched him with the same fear that now ruled the entire empire. When the moment came, he presented himself before her command, unarmed, stripped of imperial regalia. He submitted himself as a defeated leader, prepared to offer whatever it would take to halt her advance. His voice trembled as he spoke of the ancient treaties that once held the galaxy together. He invoked the shared histories between species, the legacy of cooperation that had survived previous wars. He spoke of balance, of stability, of the need to preserve what remained of the galactic order. Her response was brief. She listed the names of those responsible for the massacre, the warlords who had orchestrated the attack on the civilian convoy, the leaders who had laughed in the imperial court as they dismissed her warnings. She demanded their unconditional surrender. The Emperor's face faltered as he realized that several of those names belonged to the very figures still clinging to power within his fractured empire. She offered no other terms. There were no negotiations. The Emperor pleaded for alternatives, offering entire sectors, fleets, tribute, but she repeated the list. Those individuals would surrender themselves, or the empire would dissolve completely. There was no middle ground. The Emperor, desperate to save something of his legacy, turned against his former allies. He dispatched imperial enforcers to apprehend the remaining warlords, betraying the very assembly that had once empowered him. Some fled into the void, others surrendered immediately, and a few chose self-destruction over capture. When the warlords were presented to her, she ordered their immediate removal from power and their exile into isolated systems under strict human supervision. There would be no executions, no public displays of punishment. Her justice was quiet, efficient, and absolute. The galaxy understood that their removal was not a gesture of mercy. It was a permanent erasure of their influence. With the key figures dismantled, the woman general imposed a new structure across the territory she had crossed. She did not claim the empire. She did not plant human flags on conquered worlds. She established binding accords that prohibited further incursions into human-controlled space. She mandated that any violations of the new boundaries would result in immediate, absolute response without negotiation. Her terms were enforced by the weight of what she had just demonstrated. No one doubted she would follow through. The Emperor abdicated his position, not by ceremonial declaration, but by necessity. His empire dissolved around him as planetary governors pledged allegiance to the new accords, recognizing the woman general's authority as the unchallenged enforcer of galactic stability. They did not seek her approval. They submitted because they knew the alternative. Her human commanders executed the transition without celebration. They moved with precision, solidifying supply routes, ensuring the demilitarization of key sectors, and overseeing the surrender of remaining fleets. They understood the depth of what had transpired. Humanity had not simply defended itself. It had redefined its place in the galaxy. It had moved from the periphery to the center of power, not through conquest, but through the demonstration of will, patience, and absolute consequence. The woman general never issued a victory speech. She made no public statements. She did not accept titles or honors. She returned to her command center and resumed her role as a protector of human space. She remained vigilant, knowing the galaxy would remember her silence longer than any declaration. The former emperor was permitted to live, stripped of power, confined to a remote system under observation. His name, once spoken with reverence, faded from the records. The warlords who survived their exile became ghosts. Their influence erased, their legacies reduced to cautionary tales. The galaxy adjusted to the new reality. Diplomats from every major faction now treated human representatives with a respect that bordered on reverence. They approached negotiations with the awareness that patience had limits, that silence could be the loudest threat. Treaties were signed swiftly, border disputes resolved without delay. Provocation ceased entirely. Within human space, the woman general's legacy became a point of complex reflection. Some saw her as the embodiment of justice, others as a warning of what humans could become when pushed beyond reason. Her own commanders understood her in a way the galaxy could not. They knew she had not sought glory, that every step had been a burden she carried to protect others. They knew that her silence was not a void but shield. The story of her campaign spread across systems, retold in fragments, often distorted, but always carrying the same core lesson. Mercy is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. Humanity may offer peace, but it is not compelled to.